I'll unmute here. Hold on.
Okay. And Mark is a past chair of the management forum
Yeah,
for Zach. So thanks for coming back and sharing your material.
absolutely. So thank you. Thank you
for.
for giving me the opportunity. I'm going to talk fast. So great, 4 great presentations. I mean, and they actually tie nicely to mine, talking about avoiding fear, talking about purpose, tradition, and coaching. All of that ties into what I have to say here. So without ado, so what is it? Why do we do what we do as professors, right? And, one of the things I know about most of you is, and we've heard it already from some of you, is, you're in a second career. This is something that you are doing for meaning and purpose. And so if you read my newsletter, which followed out of my chair time, I was recently writing about this idea that meaning is connection times contribution times competence. And, it's easy for us to see in our roles, those first two: connection. If you're a teacher, teaching is fundamentally about connecting with your students. And if you're not connecting, you're probably not teaching that well. And then, contribution, of course, it's easy to see as you build up your students over time. But what about competence? And how does competence contribute to meaning? And I want to say we have a need as human beings to do stuff, to be challenged and to be excellent. And so this got me thinking about the Japanese concept of do. And so showing you here some images. What is do? Well, it's the Japanese word for way, and it sort of like a road, implies like a journey, and it's really the path to enlightenment. And so I want to draw on a very old book by a gentleman named Miyamoto Musashi. The book is called The Book of Five Rings, or the Gori no Sho, and Musashi wrote it in 1645. So it's an old strategy manual, still studied today in Japanese business programs, as I understand it. And what he writes back in 1645 is, there are various ways. There is the way of salvation by the law of Buddha, the way of Confucius governing the way of learning, the way of healing as a doctor, the way of tea, archery, and many arts and skills. Each man practices as he feels inclined. It is said that the way of the warrior is the twofold way of the pen and sword. So Musashi was a samurai, and he is considered, they call him the sword saint. So he was considered the greatest swordsman to ever live. And so images you have here is and I'm going to say, I'm not a Japanese expert, but the Chanayu, which is the tea ceremony, the Ikebana, which is flower arranging. And then those are two arts that form different kinds of do. They're different kinds of ways. And then finally, kendo, which is the way of the sword, judo, which you probably heard of, right, is the gentle way. So these things have in common a commitment to practice and repetition that can lead to what you've probably seen, this idea of a flow state. So what is flow? Well, this term refers to a mental state in which a person is completely focused on a single task or activity. So you can imagine if you're doing fencing, sword fencing, and somebody's going to knock you on the head, you're pretty focused. And so the idea here is that it feels like you are in the zone. So I think we all have felt that, whether we do kendo or something else. It's something that we do that leads us to, gives us a sense of flow. Played sports, done some sort of art, right? But I want to say that do is more than flow. I like that. Do is more than flow. And the David Lowery, who is a American martial arts expert, wrote in his book, The Sword and the Brush, that the attainment of the way is in the process. It's about doing something for this, not for the sake of doing it, but because the doing takes us out of ourself, right? So the way draws us into the domain of the potential self. Musashi in his book says, it's difficult to realize the true way just through sword fencing. One must know the smallest things and the biggest things, the shallowest things and the deepest things. And so he's saying that to be a master of strategy, which was what he was, you have to do more than just focus on in one task. So what I take away from this is the way is about doing, about repetition, and about seeking perfection with a heavy emphasis on the seeking, right? It's a process, not a destination. And flow comes from competence in a task, but the do is about expanding from the specific, being an expert in something, but then allowing that expertise takes you to a place that gives you a deeper insight into the general. So from the specific to the general. And so Musashi says, if you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything. Men must polish their particular way. And so he's not saying everybody's got to be a kendo master. What he's saying is you got to find your way. Flower arranging, tea ceremony, whatever it is that works for you, that's what you need to do so you can find that way. Now, Musashi published a nine bullet what amounts to basically a competency model in his book. And so he says, this is the way of strategy. There's these 9 things. And I'm not going to go through them all because we don't have time. But what I want to point out here is, he's a sword master, and none of those say sticking people with pointy objects or cutting off the limbs of your opponents, right? It's all fairly general stuff about how to live, how to gain greater understanding, how to perfect yourself, how to seek economizing. So taking that and asking, so what is the do of HAE, of health administration education? Here's where I don't have an answer. I'm thinking about it as a relatively recent practitioner, and Musashi said, so Musashi describes tell me in one line, what is it you're doing? He says, well, the way of strategy is based on overcoming men. Okay, well, that's not what we do. So I threw out here a few options. The way of HAE is based on overcoming obstacles to better care, improving systems of delivery, maybe helping people overcome themselves, which I think is actually the ultimate answer to what is the way, regardless of what it is. So then we'd say, well, what's your competency model for that? I don't know. We can work on that maybe. But what I think is there's something special about what we do, right? And how does our practice help us pursue our potential self? A lot of what we do, we're servant, I think broadly, if you're a good professor, you're a servant leader, right? You're out there helping people, but there's something about the pursuit itself that is good for us, right? Something about the pursuit itself that helps lead us to self-realization, self-cultivation, self-perfection, not just for our students, but for ourselves. And that process makes us better at what we do. And so it's a virtuous cycle of improving ourselves, improves our students, and so on. So the questions I would leave you with is, how does our practice make us better human beings? How does it help us transcend the ordinary? And ultimately, what is our way? What is our do? And so I'll leave you with this quote directly from Musashi: more than anything, you must set your heart on health administration education and earnestly stick to the way. Thank you.